When you're a stoner in a small town, there's not a lot of things to do when you get high. There's tons of cool places to get yourself cooked, but not a lot to do once the sesh is over. Your options are pretty much limited to option 1, hanging out at someone's house, option 2, going to a playground, or option 3, going on a walk in the woods. Me and my friends typically go for option 3 because we're a group of small autistic lads who find a lot of joy in woodland adventures, especially once you throw some godly green goodness into the mix. If it's winter, you're pretty much stuck with option 1 because nobody really wants to be outside in the freezing cold when they're baked. In the summer, it's fantastic because you get the added option of finding somewhere to swim. Me and my friends have a great place we go in the summers where we get to combine the woodland adventures with the swimming. There's a place we go in the woods above this deep stream, and it has a rickety, probably not all that safe wooden diving board built into the side of a steep hill that drops off into the water. Now, just because it's a diving board doesn't mean that anybody should ever actually dive here. That's a pretty terrible idea. The water is deep enough that the jump is safe, but shallow enough that your feet still touch the bottom every time. So we always just call this place the platform. So one hot summer day when I was 19, I had just gotten done hanging out with my friend Pat. Me and Pat had only been hanging out for about 45 minutes, but I had to bring him home because he had to leave for work before long. After I dropped him off, I immediately wanted to go find somebody else to hang out with because I had some weed on me and I had just kind of gone into the day hoping to smoke it with someone and just spend the day with somebody in general. As I'm trying to decide who to call and where we would go, I remember that I have a big rubber dinghy in my trunk from when I had gone to the quarry with my girlfriend and my sister a couple days prior. Instantly, a plan starts to formulate in the depths of my skull, so I call the homie Kieran because I know he's the only friend I have other than Pat who's actually ape-brained enough to go along with this idea. Kieran picks up the phone and I explain to him that in about 20 minutes I'm going to be at his house to pick him up and we're going to ride the rubber dinghy in the stream at the platform until it takes us back into town. See, most streams in our general area all lead into different sections of this river that flows through town. When you're in a boat or a dinghy or a floaty in the river, you can pretty much always tell where in town you are and get to the riverbank to get out whenever you want. So I figure we'll eventually flow out into the river and see what part of town we've arrived in and just get out there. Kieran agrees to this plan without a second thought, and the next thing I know, he's in my passenger seat and we're driving to the entrance of the woods that the platform is located. Normally getting to the platform is a pain in the ass and involves some climbing across a really flat rock wall that can only be done in one way and also only really works if you're barefoot or have really good shoes on. So if you plan on bringing anything there with you, you pretty much need to remember to bring a backpack with you. The other options are to swim to it or to take a really long steep uphill climb through the woods. Me and my friends usually take the rock wall because life is more fun when you make an adventure out of everything. Luckily, today we only needed to get to the water, not the actual diving board, so all we have to do is park at the edge of the woods and waddle on into where the stream is, and once we get there, I start blowing up the dinghy with my mouth like the fucking degenerate that I am, because I forgot to bring a pump when I'd originally taken the dinghy to the quarry, so this was actually the second time I had given this stupid thing mouth to mouth. Eventually my CPR brings the dinghy to life, and we're ready to set off on our adventure. I take off my off-brand Crocs and just kind of rest them on my lap in the boat. Kieran takes off his flip-flops and sits them in the rocks of the shoreline before getting in. Now, this would actually turn out to be a fatal mistake for him, but we'll get back to that later. Now that both of us are in the dinghy, we use a nearby stick to push ourselves into the current, and we begin floating down the stream. Starting out, the water was actually pretty deep and was moving at a nice mellow pace. We were floating peacefully, and while the sun was beating down on us, being atop the water kept us in a nice cool temperature. The flies were present, but they weren't too annoying on this day, at least not yet, and this part of the day is honestly a peak summer memory for me. I had brought some joints and my Bluetooth speaker along, and within minutes we were both leaning back relaxed on the water with some fresh greens in the air and Metro Booming's Across the Spider-Verse soundtrack playing at a nice medium volume. Moments like this are the images that pop into my head when I just hear the word summer. The combination of the beautiful summer day, floating down the stream, and Metro Boomin' mixed with the weed resulted in a fantastic high, and the vibes were strong. This is about the energy that we had for the first hour or so of our voyage, as the water stayed reasonably deep and only got fast or bumpy a couple of times. Overall, we were having a really good time. It was around the hour and 10-minute mark when a hornet showed up and started buzzing around our heads. I took a stupid chance when it landed on me and tried to swat it, which turned out to be a bad idea because it didn't work, and this little bitch boy was whizzing around our heads and landing on us and being swatted at for at least 15 minutes. I don't remember if one of us got it or if it eventually left on its own, but either way, eventually the little fucker wasn't bothering us anymore. What was bothering us is that the water suddenly isn't quite as deep as it once was. This is now around the hour and 25-minute mark, and while it's still deep enough that we're not touching the bottom at all, we're definitely much closer to it, and anytime we go over some rapids, which is now happening about once every 5 minutes, we do gently bump the bottom. So while things are okay for now, we know that before too long, they're going to get a lot worse. And unfortunately, we're not exactly in a location at the moment where it's easy to just bring the boat to shore, so we decide to keep going. Conditions stay like this for around a half hour before they suddenly get really bad. We're now close to the 2-hour mark, and we're constantly going over rapids, and the water is barely deep enough for us to stay floating. The water is moving extremely fast, and we're getting stuck on bigger rocks here and there. The rocks in the rapids are getting jagged, and before we know it, we hear a pop. The dinghy has 2 different parts that blow up. One is the bottom of the boat and the other is the sides of the boat. The bottom was what got busted, so most of the boat was still inflated enough that we were able to keep going. However, now, every time that we go over rapids, the sharp rocks are literally shooting directly up our assholes because we no longer have any cushioning underneath of us. We eventually make our way into an area where the bank of the stream isn't too steep, and we see this as an opportunity to flee from the water. We paddle ourselves by hand to dry land and decide to follow alongside the stream until we get out to where it meets the river. Our Denisovan brains calculated that if we've been floating along for at least 2 hours and 10 minutes, it's probably quicker to just finish the journey than to head back. But our stoned noggins didn't put together that we still didn't know where this stream was going to meet the river, or how long we'd have to walk back to my car once we got there. We trudged through the woods for about 2 hours, eventually abandoning the stream before coming out into a wheat field in the next town over from ours. So really, it would have been about the same just to turn back, and the walk to the car would have been about 4 minutes. Now we're stranded in a completely different town. Walking back to the car will be about 4 hours no matter how we do it, but luckily by this point the weed was fully wore off, so we just went to a nearby Tim Hortons and called my parents to come bring us back to my car. And while they weren't overly thrilled, they did find it funny when we told them how we got there, which is a positive. I don't think this was the first time me and a friend got lost in the woods high, and it most certainly wasn't the last, and if there's any moral to the story, I guess it would be to look up a stream on your map app before you decide to float down it, and also maybe check it out the day before so you know if it's safe. Also, don't leave your shoes behind when you go on a rubber dinghy ride, because my boy Kieran had to go raw dog until we got back to my car. That's all for this story, so like and subscribe, leave a comment if you want to, and have a good day.